All right. Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? It's 8:30, time to get the show on the road, I guess, right? So we're going to be talking about Lync hybrid scenarios today, right? I hope you guys are in the right place. This is Lync. All right, my name is Avi Magoo. I've been with Microsoft for coming up on 7 years. I am now a Lync technology specialist based out of Houston. Prior to that, I was actually part of Premier. I'm also an MCM. Been through 2 rotations, R2 in 2010, still waiting on 2013. Been around the block with the product a few times. Right? By the way, interestingly enough, if you go up and down the hallways today, you will see the term hybrid used a lot. So I guess we will demystify what that means, hopefully, as we move through. All right. Understanding Lync interoperability with Office 365, some of the objectives. Understanding split domain and what does hybrid truly mean. And then, of course, the interaction between Lync Server and Lync Online and functionality, right? Depending on what products you're looking at in the cloud, where does Lync live? Is it Office 365? Is it on-prem? What we don't cover, live meeting migrations, please. If you have questions around that, find me at Ask the Experts. Find me, I've got booth duty pretty much all the way through Wednesday. I was hanging around there. I know I ran into quite a few of you there yesterday. We've got a number of folks that can answer a number of questions, right? We're not going to talk about O365D. Multi-tenant is the one thing that we're going to look at. Dedicated is a completely different beast. And then, of course, Skype interoperability. Even though, now that it's released, I could say, well, it just kind of sort of works. And, of course, the key takeaways. All of the existing scenarios between Lync Server and Lync Online. And, well, I'm sure I'll get questions on the one that doesn't exist. We'll get through those as we can. And then, of course, deployment requirements. And specifically, there are steps you're going to have to follow if you're looking to enable any of this, and I will call out the big ones along the way. All right, so, deployment choices. Lync has pretty much been an on-prem product coming into 2013. Now, with 2013, we have this concept of Lync hybrid. But traditionally, your 2 choices all the way through 2010 were Lync Server or Lync Online, right? Hosted multi-tenant, and you should be familiar with some of the drawbacks that existed. Tony's blog actually points out all of the things we're working on and the timelines, and when we're going to try to get some of these functionalities on par with on-prem capabilities. So hybrid actually services certain needs. And I'll kind of run through those as we go to. Just to make sure we're speaking the same language. And I am perfectly guilty of doing this as well. Lync split domain. That basically is the ability to have a cross-premise deployment in Lync, right? A lot of times hybrid is actually used as that term, but hybrid doesn't quite stand for that. Hybrid could be, I have Lync on-prem, but I may have Exchange Online and multi-tenant. Or I may have Lync Online and Exchange on-prem, or SharePoint on-prem, right? But split domain is really kind of the magic mojo that's been introduced with 2013. We are one of the only companies that actually give you that ability to expand an on-prem environment into the cloud and actually have that cross-premise interaction where an end user doesn't know where they're living, right? Nor should they care. So we'll dive right into it. We'll dive right into Lync split domain itself. So what is the value proposition, right? Obviously, there needs to be a driving force, or there may be a driving force already that says, well, we really want to try to go use Lync Online for some of our users or all of our users. So the value prop really is move users from Lync Server to Lync Online and back. Don't forget that part, right? So if split domain exists, we can actually take an end user from on-prem, it's PowerShell move, we can move that user out to the cloud, and if the user's needs change, and we'll talk about all the functionalities, right? If the user's needs and requirements actually change, we can move that user back on-prem, where you still today have more capability. Online and on-prem, unfortunately, are not on par just yet. They will be. Flexibility in making PBX replacement sites by decision. Voice functionality is something that on-prem is really on-prem or actually dedicated are the ways to go, or a partner-hosted model, right? So if you're really interested in Lync Voice and you're looking at Lync as a PBX replacement, you probably don't want to host that user in multi-tenant just yet. However, you may have a large chunk of the population that really isn't geared for that yet, or they're not slated for voice functionality just yet, and those users could be hosted in Office 365. The idea is we can take our deployment footprint and shrink it, right? Using Office 365 as that box where we can send these users and all of their resources are being taken care of by somebody else, effectively. You know what? I need to add one more thing to the front. The other thing we're not going to talk about either is Lync in Azure. As I said, come find me outside and we can kind of dig into the details there as well, right? Hosted infrastructure for robust conferencing needs. I have a number of customers that I've talked to where they don't want to take in that responsibility of hosting conferencing, right? They may have an outsourced model today. They may be outsourcing to a different vendor. Well, they've suddenly become liable for that support, and at least that's how they view it, right? The good, the bad, the ugly, right? You can pay somebody else. You are paying somebody else, or you can take it on, and as you take it on, it becomes your problem. Lync multi-tenant can give you that ability. Today, we actually go up to 250 users a meeting. That number will eventually change. Additional scenarios will be introduced. Again, Tony's blog kind of points out where we're headed in that, where we're headed with conferencing. What kind of scenarios are we really looking at? And then, segmenting users between Lync Server and Lync Online. Lync Online users, non-PBX replacement sites. Again, use it as a repository for users, use it as a conferencing source for those users, but as soon as voice is something that you want that user to have, outbound dialing, by voice I don't mean peer-to-peer sessions, of course. I mean PSTN connectivity. They need to be pulled back on-prem today, right? So enabling Lync split domain, there are two pieces that really, the crux of the matter, these are the two things that matter the most. The identity components, right? So we are at this point looking at a federated identity. This can't be a cloud ID, which basically means you can't be using something like, Office 365 Home Premium. That is a cloud ID-based solution, right? There's no Active Directory. There's no interaction between the two. Of course, we have Windows Azure Directory services that run Office 365. Federation and DirSync are the two key components. So DirSync allows me to take my on-prem identity, sync it up into Azure, at least the required attributes, and it also and the ADFS capabilities then give me an authentication gateway for that end user, right? I am still, as an enterprise, responsible for authenticating my user using ADFS. Okay? And that's the only way you're going to get SSO as well, right? And then, of course, the second piece is the configuration of Lync split domain. Lync server, Lync online, right? We'll get into details. So, optimize for interoperability across Lync communication modalities between on-prem and online users. And of course, all of the workloads. So again, think of Lync and how you do pool placements. Your end users, a pool is responsible for that end user's needs. Conferencing, the MCU allocation, all of that happens on that appropriate pool. Online, I mean, in the lack of a better term, you can always think of it as another pool that's available to you. If the user lives in that pool, all of their needs and requirements are met by that pool. Now, we may not be on par today with that functionality, but we'll get there, right? And of course, we do require you to be on the latest version of Office 365, which means if you have an existing 2010 tenant, it has to be migrated to 2013. Split domain is not available in 2010 Office 365. Now, we'll also look at all the different various and sundry configurations that you can have on-prem talking to a 2013 Office 365 tenant. So infrastructure requirement for a Lync split domain. So we've got Fabricam that has their local on-prem Active Directory, and you can see Roy and Alice are two Fabricam users. So the first things first, let me just run through this. We need to actually fire up Office 365 DirSync. We need to take that identity, we need to merge it up into Azure Active Directory in Office 365, right? Or at least get the user objects created. We also need to ensure that the provisioning service is continuing fully, and of course, ADFS is fully available. Lync Online actually goes through and reads from that provisioning information. You will actually go through at that point, do a license assignment, right? So an end user has to be checkmarked for Lync. Once that license assignment is done, you can actually go through, well, single sign-on's happening here. All of our external access is actually happening through Federation. And at that point, we can start moving a user from on-prem across. So there's two flows that we're looking at here. The top flow is authentication, while the bottom flow is the actual communication between the pools. We are using Edge services, so Edge must be deployed, right? As you can see, Alice is now on Lync Online, which again is a PowerShell move command. Roy doesn't actually really know, nor does he care, Alice is online. It's the entire point of this. So the coexistence topologies themselves. Today, you may have Lync 2010 on-prem. A Lync 2010 Edge server suffices. You must be at the latest and greatest CU. Honestly, it was CU 5 was where you needed to be, but get to the latest and greatest CU, right? As long as you're there, Lync 2010 can actually go through and do split domain with Lync 2013 in Office 365. You must, however, extend your schema. Lync 2013 PowerShell must be available. If you're an R2, you must actually install Lync 2013 and Lync 2013 Edge servers, so R2 doesn't directly interoperate. And then we get into 2013 itself. Natively, we are ready to go. So the actual planning checklist. Active Directory for us, of course, Lync server version, Federation. So actually, this is a key topic, Federation. You actually have to have the identical Federation settings between the two environments, which means Federation must be enabled. Okay? If you don't federate, we can't have signaling between the two pools. So we're actually using those same channels to converse. And then, of course, what features are critical for the end user? This is really the key. You have to go through and look at what the user needs. Understand what the limitations are as we go through those. If your users actually don't have an issue with certain services not being available, we can very easily move those users along. All right. So what do we have as a difference between Lync server and Lync Online? As you can see, no XMPP gateway, right? No persistent chat. And then, of course, Federation with Yahoo and AOL. Federation is available with Skype in Office 365. However, Yahoo and AOL have been replaced. You can still do partner federation, which is no big deal. But again, XMPP gateway services, persistent chat, and federation with AOL and Yahoo are not provided in Office 365. And actually, that's IM presence only. What about meetings, right? As we start digging into meetings, you can easily see ACP integration is required. You can't do native bridging today in Office 365. Multi-tenant, that is. And then the meeting sizes themselves, and most of you should be aware when we talk about the 1,000-user meeting size, that's a dedicated pool for conferencing services, right? And we have a configuration that's available there. The meeting size in Office 365 today still stands at 250. Lync split domain. So what gets migrated when we actually go through and move a user, right? Their contact list. I mean, we can't really call it a move if you're not moving users' content, right? The contact list is the holy grail when it comes to Lync. Your actual groups and your ACLs, they actually move fully, not migrated. Online meetings. So there's supposed to be a tool that's going to help with that. And I honestly also need to do some follow-up on that and figure out where that tool went, right? So again, come find me and ask the experts if that's an issue. Meeting content. We don't move meeting content, right? So an end user may have to go through, reconfigure their meetings and send out a new link. The client migration itself, the Lync client 2013 is actually required for users migrated to Lync Online. Understand there are base client requirements, right? And those are purely dictated by Office 365 at that point. So again, there's a bit of flexibility loss, right? On-prem, it's a very flexible, fluid environment. And obviously, understand what our support parameters are, which are N-2. But also understand, when you get to Office 365, those parameters are dictated by a team that's managing that infrastructure, right? And of course, a lot of feedback from the product teams themselves. So you may actually have to accelerate other things if Lync 2013 comes into play, right? You may actually have to accelerate deployment of perhaps a new version of Office. So all of those things actually have to be looked at before making a decision to do something like this. What are your client choices? As you can see, we can pretty much work with everything. Lync 2013, the Windows Store app is fully functional. Lync web app is available online. The mobile clients are fully functional, including peer-to-peer calling, as well as Lync for Mac 2011. The Lync meeting room systems, I know there's one out in the Lync area. If you guys haven't seen it, I find that to be a very, very cool device. And you know what? Just walk past everybody, hit the little arrow, whiteboard, and go play around with it. It's a fantastic experience. But those devices will also natively connect into Office 365. All right. Getting into the slightly nitty-gritty. Enabling, so what is the actual configuration process for a Lync split domain? Enable federation with your Office 365 tenant, right? At this point, if you look at the next step, which is configure Lync 2013 Edge for federation, you're actually basically setting, using DNS server routing, allow outside users, allow federated users, enable partner discovery. Edge and tenant must have equivalent settings. If they don't, it will not work. Federate with Office 365. So at this point, we go in and we actually pull in the CS hosting provider commandlet. And as you can see, proxy FQDN is cipfedonline.lync.com. Enable shared address space. This is exactly what you're doing. If you look at something like an Exchange setup from Lync on-prem to Exchange Online, that'll be $false because you're not actually spreading your namespace. Right? Hosts OCS users is true. Yes, the partner on the other side, Office 365 multi-tenant, will actually have OCS users. Verification level, use source verification, and then of course it's local false. The auto-discover URL is also something, and the auto-discover URL, no, actually not here. I'll get to a commandlet shortly where it is case sensitive. Enable Office 365 tenant for split domain. I think I need to highlight that. I need to maybe bold that, have it flash out a few times. It is not enabled automatically today. Okay? So if this is something that you're doing and you followed every step so far, you're going to get to this point. You're going to say, the next step is, of course, moving a user. You're going to try to move that user, and you'll get bright red statements coming back in PowerShell. Okay? And you will have to call into support, and the turnaround time for this is the standard answer, which is it'll take a week to 2 weeks to get it done. So I would suggest if you start going down this path, you probably take that last step on this slide and move it to the top. You actually place that support call and ensure your tenant is enabled for split domain. You're going to save yourself some time in the migration process. So the actual user move, by the way, we're supposed to have a demo, and the demo gods are actually frowning upon us, so there's more slides to look at. Okay. Link split domain and moving those actual users. So now we're assuming that ADFS is up. We've gone through, DirSync is completed for the user. We've actually gone back into the portal, and we've enabled the user's license, so they're assigned a Lync license itself. And here we go. Move CS user, alice@fabricam.com. Pretty standard so far. The target, sipfedonline.lync.com. Notice we go right back to our provider statement, right? This is where we're targeting. Credentials, of course, you're going to have to provide admin credentials for the tenant. Proxy pool on-prem. So this is an interesting one. The only time this is used is if you have a director. Okay, so in Lync 2013, if you have a director, we're going to have to provide a value for proxy pool and the actual on-prem pool, the director value itself. And last but not least, hosting migration override URL. Okay, this is actually the Lync server control panel online. And if you look closely, I've got an example in there. It's based on the admin portal URL, and that's going to change depending on where you are in the world. So what you want to do is you want to actually go in and you want to look at when you log into the admin portal, the URL up top will actually change. You want to ensure that you're looking at either admin 0A or admin 0B, which one is your particular URL. Does that make sense? And then the rest of that statement, the hosted migration and hosted migration service, those are case sensitive. Don't ask why, but they are. And I learned the hard way. But that's how we move a user. So what's actually happening behind the scenes? So again, we've got everything up and running. Alice is a Fabricam. Look at our home pool, right? Deployment locator sipfedonline.lync.com. So this is the sign-in experience. Alice basically goes through, and she's on-prem, or she may be on external, right? You've got SRV records that are published. Those SRV records could point to Office 365. They could point to your on-prem deployment. Doesn't really make a difference. More than likely, you haven't changed that because you started with an on-prem deployment. So in this case, Alice goes through and fires up her client. You know, we look at a cache file, or we're going to look at either the Lync cache, or we're going to go through and do the SRV record lookup. We go to the on-prem pool itself, whether it's external or internal. The pool comes back, looks at us and says, no, you don't actually have a pool value here. However, your deployment locator says you need to go to SipFed. At that point, we're going to redirect to the Lync Online Edge server. It happens to be sipfed.online.lync.com. Right? At that point, the Edge server will actually follow in. It'll actually ask Lync Online that we've got Alice trying to sign in, and now the authentication process actually kicks off itself. So up top, the Office 365 identity engine's asked, which then comes back to your ADFS gateway, which then queries Active Directory. As long as credentials match, we've got magic. So what are we doing when it comes to IAM and presence? We've got two users here. We've got Roy and Alice, right? And we also know where Alice lives. Actually, in this particular instance, Roy is the one who's online. So there we go. Roy goes through and asks for Alice. Again, we find the sipfed online lync.com, the deployment locator. We send that traffic all the way across the edge. The edge talks to the pool actually looks up the information. Pool contacts Alice at that point, right? So as you can see, we've got signaling that's going across that federated partner channel, which basically makes, it makes Edge a key deployment piece, a key deployment component here. you need to ensure that edge services are available at all times. If edge services unfortunately become unavailable during this time, we'll basically end up breaking that interaction, right? What do we do about meetings now? Well, interestingly enough, it depends on who's going to go through and organize the meeting. So in this case, we're going to have Alice organize that meeting. We're in Lync Online. As you can see, we've got all of the interactions up and running. So what happened for the flow? Does it really matter where Roy is physically located? No. If Roy is internal, we'll actually use the edge server to proxy those ports back out. If Roy is sitting externally, the media is more than likely going to connect directly to SIPFed. Right? I mean, that's just purely stun and how the Lync Online Edge is going to handle that communication. But signaling, as you can see, is still processing through the different places. Again, we go right back to that concept of online is just a pool. If it's a pool, the MCU for that user that's hosted in that pool is going to be delivered by online, right? As such, we need to basically make sure that all of these interactions, all of these communication channels are wide open. And at that point, the end user will effectively do the same thing that they do if Alice were located on-prem, which is, I need to go bind to this MCU. This is the focus I'm trying to connect to, right? Focus gets instantiated. Next user comes in, they get pointed over to the focus, and off we go. And look at the media. So in this case, we're assuming that they're both sitting on outside, right? If you look at the media, since this is really a peer-to-peer scenario, oh no, actually we're still in meetings. Yeah, that media is wrong. All right, so what happens if we go the other way? Roy actually goes through and establishes this meeting. Pretty much the same exact thing, right? But interestingly enough, we are external now, right? You're not going to be on-prem with Office 365 ever. So while, if we go back a couple of slides, while there's a possibility that the media itself connects using edge services, if Roy is inside the organization, when we talk about something like Roy going through and creating that meeting, notice there is no possibility for us to do so. Alice will always try to directly connect to the edge. She's sitting outside. Now, if Alice happens to be inside the organization, she'll connect directly to that MCU. All right, so we get into Lync Hybrid. You know, again, just walking up and down the hallways, I think coming in this morning, I counted 5 different places where we use the term hybrid, right? There's a cloud hybrid scheduled class down that way. I think I saw another Exchange hybrid or cross-premise class. It is an overloaded term. We'll go back to the value prop, right? What is the value proposition between Lync hybrid, or for hybrid rather? You have the ability to deploy whatever productivity suite product in whichever location, right? So again, I don't have to put Lync online. If Lync is something where I am considering it as a PBX, or I actually have a rather sizable workload for voice, I'm actually going to go through and leave Lync on-prem, but perhaps Exchange is what's going to something like Office 365 multi-tenant. And if that's the case, we are in a quote-unquote hybrid configuration, right? Now, you know, again, there is this drive today where the cloud is coming into a lot of conversations, right? In fact, I was having a conversation earlier today, and we started off in this environment where, you know, mainframe days where you looked at monolithic, ginormous servers, and everything was centrally computed, and then you actually had clients that were accessing this information, right? And then for the next 10 years, we actually spent time breaking out into distributed computing. And we were trying to push all of that out to individual users, individual systems, servers building out, and now the advent of the cloud, right? And as we look at the advent of the cloud, we're going right back to that monolithic scenario. Yeah, it's not one machine anymore. It may be hundreds of thousands of machines. I think Xbox One, the announcement was 180,000 servers. You guys can keep me honest. Acting in tandem, right? But we are kind of going back to that. As we look at that, right, there's a drive to start moving some of these different silos, as I like to call them, into the cloud. So for us, Office 365 is one component of that. Coming from an Exchange background back in the day, Exchange is probably the one product where we have the most amount of parity between on-prem and online today. There are cost savings that can be realized by management and just the complexity of the local infrastructure. It may not necessarily be true that in certain terms you may actually see your costs rise, but a lot of times we don't think about things like, well, what does it take to maintain that product as we move forward, right? So you look at Lync. Lync 2010 came out, Lync 2013 came out, roughly 2 years behind. If you read Tony's blog, he's already mentioned a new version of Lync next year sometime. You keep up with all of those things. And how do you keep up? What kind of effort does it take to keep up with those upgrades? Right? This is the value prop of the cloud itself, is we can try to save you some of those upgrades and what the costs associated with those upgrades and transitioning of those users as we move forward. All right, so we've got a number of mixed Exchange scenarios that we actually support today, right? So if Lync's server is on-prem and Exchange is online, basically, as you can see, user mailbox and the calendar is online, but instant messaging, presence, meetings, and enterprise voice can be available on-prem. Now, if Lync is online and Exchange server is on-prem, right, again, we have certain scenarios that go missing. This is why I say Exchange probably has the most amount of parity when it comes to on-prem versus online. So if Lync is on-prem, we can pretty much do anything we want between Exchange server and Exchange online. There used to be a bullet in here that said scheduling via OWA. We haven't quite provided that yet, so I took it out. But if you can see, right, I mean, there's a lot of checkboxes there. All right. So when we start looking at what happens with Exchange Online, or Lync Online and Exchange actually sitting on-prem, you start noticing a slight different scenario there, right? A lot of those checkboxes go away. So if Lync is online and Exchange is on premises, you won't be able to do IM and presence in OWA, which today is the web client that we use, right? So for IM and presence, that is our web client. That's a pretty big deal. And then we get into high-resolution contact photos themselves. How many people are actually doing high-resolution photos in Lync 2013, Exchange 2013? But they go missing in Lync web app. We can't actually provide that functionality. Then we get into archiving content in Exchange. So absolutely amazing thing that we've actually finally gone through and done, which is looking at SharePoint becoming some of that glue between Exchange and Lync. So when you're on the 2013 series of products, Fast is a component inside of SharePoint now. It used to be a completely separate component. Fast is the engine that actually goes through and looks at all of the data, all of the indexing that happens inside of Exchange, and SharePoint and perhaps file shares and other third-party platforms. Fast goes through, consolidates all of that, allows me to search against all of that and return results, right? So archiving content in Exchange is pretty powerful now. You know, so far traditionally in Lync, we've had SQL instances where we can actually go through and we can dump data. Trying to extract some of that data requires custom SQL reports, where we can actually, when we put a mailbox on in-place hold now in Exchange 2013, and as long as we're archiving the Lync user's information to that mailbox, everything's being logged in conversation history. It's available for searching, end user can't delete, dumpster takes over as stuff deletes, modifies, so on and so forth. We're tracking all of that content. It's a very powerful tool for e-discovery. However, if we have Lync Online Exchange Server on-prem, that is not available. However, it is available when we look at Lync Online, Exchange Online together. Searching that archive content goes down the same exact path. It becomes unavailable if we are an Exchange server on-prem. So we don't have voice in Lync Online currently, right, as far as a hybrid scenario. And that kind of shows you another issue. If you are Exchange on-prem and you're using Lync Online, we can't use Exchange Unified Messaging in multi-tenant. So if we were providing voice today and you were running Exchange on-prem, unfortunately, you wouldn't be able to log to voicemail. It's a problem. And then, of course, we get into the Unified Contact Store, which the second I got moved on to 2013 got enabled, and it's kind of nice. I can actually go through, finally have that true sync between Outlook contacts and Lync, right? Before we used to do that weird match where, you know, if I had an IM address, I'd merge the contact, who takes precedence, it's always fun. Lync becomes a consumer in the Unified Contact Store scenario of information that's being stored in contacts in Exchange. It's much better to have one place where I'm writing all of that, and I'm actually going through and reading all of that back. All right, we get into Lync Online and Lync On-Prem, what happens with SharePoint. So, you know, I mean, honestly, there are a couple of things that happen in SharePoint today, right? We've got skill search, and we've got presence in SharePoint. So presence in SharePoint pretty much works regardless, because we are using the Lync app itself, and we're reading that content, and we're reading contact cards directly out of, directly using the Lync client. We're basically just pulling that information up into the page. Skill search, however, is a personal favorite of mine. You know, we've got quite a few employees at Microsoft, and there are times you are looking for people to answer questions. I Am an Expert is a great platform as long as users are actually going through and subscribing into that. At Microsoft, it's opt-in only. If you don't sign up for that, I can't find you. However, when it comes to skill search, I can actually go through and look for you know, I really need somebody in finance. I can actually go search for that user, pull them up, look at what kind of, you know, where they are in the organization, who their peers are, who's up the chain, who's down the chain, and make a conscious decision on, well, do I really want to contact that person? Skill search, unfortunately, doesn't exist today, but it's something that I'm sure we're looking at. Persistent chat is another one of those applications in these scenarios that goes missing. You know, just when persistent chat starts getting even more interesting with things like, I can now delete content, right? I can actually have a timer job that goes through and removes data from chat rooms. I actually kind of like that capability. All right, folks. So we are going to have plenty of time for questions. Hopefully, you guys do understand split domain is one of those things that is just the beginning. It is just the beginning of where we are today in this cycle. And I guess I'll head off the question up front, because I know it's going to get asked. So during customer preview, we did actually have Lync Hybrid Voice. I don't know if anybody saw that, heard that. I actually got to configure that a few times. It was an interesting scenario. My Lync Online user could actually make PSTN calls. We went through and it was deprecated in the way it was released for customer preview. Again, Tony points out we will have enterprise voice in the cloud. We are looking to build that out. So again, come ask me along the way and we can perhaps get through that. And then of course, the interaction between Lync Server and Lync Online. We've got a lot of flows, but they are no different than when we talk about two pools on-prem, or perhaps two federated partners, right? That's exactly what Lync Online and Lync Server are. There are federated entities that effectively allow you to have a singular user experience. That is the beauty of it. The end users do not know. Nobody shows up as an external contact. They just show up as a standard corporate user. All right. Any questions? I think, please, if you step to one of the microphones. Thank you.
So how will this split domain thing work with the multi-source domains, so to speak? Because there's a new feature in the new Office 365 that you can sync several domains.
So today that is not something that we look at particularly in split domain just yet, right? So the multi-forest scenarios, it's not actually a limitation of Lync. Actually, it's not even really a limitation of Office 365. Most of that limitation actually comes into play from DirSync. The way those relationships exist, it's actually a single forest to Azure directory, right? Unfortunately, until DirSync actually evolves into something better, we will not be able to have multiple forests authenticate in, or at least replicate data in.
And how about resource forest?
So if you're looking at the resource forest scenarios, it's going to come back down to ADFS and the configuration there, right? We're going to have to ensure that ADFS is it's being presented from the appropriate forest. It's wherever the user authentication is going to happen. It's all using the same MSRTC SIP originator SID value to point back to different locations.
Okay. Thank you.
In one of your earlier slides, you were showing the signaling between someone who's on the 365 pool and someone who's on an on-premise pool.
Okay.
If the person who's on the 365 pool doesn't have a connection back to the person who's on-premise, how does that signaling work?
So let me get back to...
And status.
Give me 1 second. Let me pull up this slide. And we will look at... So I think it was the conferencing one, right? Yes. So it was this slide. Is that what we're talking about?
Actually, there's the one beforehand, just for IM presence. Yeah, that one.
There we go. All right. So that signaling value is not correct, right?
Okay.
Basically, this interaction is happening across the edge services themselves. So that connection has to be available between edge and SIPFed. The two users aren't actually directly doing anything in this. All of that's being carried via the signaling channel, right? So it's all set. At that point, the front end is relaying to edge, to front end, to user. So the users don't have any direct interaction here. It is always proxied by the servers.
Okay. And in this scenario, if on-prem is 2010 and online is 2013, does Alice get the 2013 features assuming she has the client?
Yeah, again, the look and feel would be different between the two clients. So, I mean, if Roy was a 2010 user and Alice is using some sort of a 2013 series client, there would really be no issue between communication. However, there would be a feature look difference versus anything else, right? Yeah, I mean, things like if this was a meeting and we were doing multiple video streams, Roy would still be looking at active speaker switched, while Alice, as long as she's not on a slate, well, actually no, that would be a Surface device looking at the client. So as long as she's on one of those, she could actually go through and look at multi-party video.
Okay, thanks.
So. Sure. Please.
So can you give us some background on the discontinuation of hybrid voice? Was it like technical reasons or business reasons?
So I've asked the question numerous times, and I can tell you from personal experience the technical issues that I saw with the solution. Again, those are my opinions. In configuration, it was tied to a single edge location. So again, since we're really looking at how this is configured, right? I would actually have a singular data center that's taking in all of this connectivity. Media flows, when we start looking at those, if I'm sitting internally, my Lync Edge server is now responsible for those. If that data center becomes unavailable, I would have to actually go through and update my SRV records, or maybe have fallback SRV records that take me somewhere else. But it would actually go through and disconnect all of those media sessions at that given time, right? So now we start looking at, well, if we have a phone system, there's that whole uptime expectance, right? PSTN, I think, historically is 99.99% uptime. When we start talking about voice over IP, and especially a cloud service, if we start losing these functionalities, voice becomes unavailable. I think another driving factor would have been what we've looked at on the Exchange side. Quite a few customers today actually have Exchange on-prem. If I can't provide voicemail for that inbound call, that's a pretty bad thing. I mean, I could use some sort of a call forward, but again, it's not the best scenario, and I think it's not something that we would really recommend ever. I'm sure there are other reasons, but I would find that for me, it was really a couple of those. Getting an end user moved actually required remote PowerShell access also, which is something that we don't actually have in Office 365 Lync just yet. So there were certain additional support tickets that needed to be generated to actually get that access back in to assign a voice policy to an end user.
So if we wanted to host basically dial-in conferencing, so PSTN number, can we have users in Lync Online and be presenting them with that PSTN number, or do they have to be all on-prem if we're going to basically host the audio conferencing?
So, I guess I kind of look at it like this. When you look at Lync as a productivity tool, the fact that I can generate a bridge whenever I feel like it is a very powerful thing for an end user. Whenever I need to have a conference call, I can pretty much go do whatever I want, right? I don't really think about how the scheduling process works, how all of that information is being dumped into that message. So if you're doing on-premise bridges, you can't really assign that conferencing policy up in Office 365. There's no checkbox that says PSTN access. Now, if you're doing ACP, we actually in the background are using setcs user ACP info to push that dial-in bridges information into the invite. Can that be done for an on-prem bridge? Maybe. But would that pretty much take the experience and make it, would it go through and dilute the experience for the end user? I would think so, right? So I don't think it's really can it be done versus more, you're going to end up actually, I guess, losing the the charm that is Lync.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi. With regards to the enterprise voice features that you said will be coming, I guess, in the next wave, can you give us some more insight on what components?
Today, there are, so with the acquisition of Skype, I think our development model has changed a bit, where features are looked at and they're actually worked on pretty quickly. Today, there's really not a lot of insight into what's going on with enterprise voice directly into the cloud. The short of it, I guess, is if that's a requirement today, it's really partner cloud solutions that are available. As far as what will be available, we'll really have to see. Now, Jamie Starks, I believe, has a blog out there where he actually went into some of the details on what he thought was really missing out of Lync 2013 hybrid voice in that scenario. I would definitely recommend that giving that a read. Actually, now that I think back, I think E911 was another pretty major concern. Right, location information services in Office 365 aren't quite available. So that would kind of cause a problem. Any additional questions?
Could you tell us a little more about partner services?
Sure. Again, there are quite a few partners. In fact, the list is growing extraordinarily, and I don't really... How about now? There we go. Sorry about that. It's early. So when it comes to the partner voice solutions themselves, I need to stop doing that. You know what? It's a syndicated offering at that point. It's Office 365, so I won't actually name partners, I guess, but there are quite a few that actually have a communications background where they can actually go through and light up EV directly in. Today, it's still being targeted as a small to mid-sized business solution. I don't necessarily know if it's an enterprise solution just yet for quite a few of them, but they do have, of course, the relationships and of course, are also regulated industries versus Microsoft, which is an unregulated provider, right? I think that may perhaps be another challenge as well today, right? The partner offerings themselves, you can pretty much light up anything. I knew of a very, very, very large customer today that's actually doing a hybrid via one of them where all of their voice services are actually being hosted completely out. And that's the other option, is also do a private cloud hosting solution, right? So that would be more in line with what Microsoft offers as an Office 365 dedicated solution, where you've got Lync as a private entity that sits in somebody else's data center. And at that point, it's Lync on-prem, just in somebody else's data center, right? So we can pretty much light up anything and everything. It just comes down to service availability and what SLAs exist. Sure?
Trying to think back on what you said.
Please.
One of the questions that I had was how support works with this type of environment.
Got it. So the question was how does support work with this kind of an environment? So with split domain, I can tell you it's the standard Office 365 support capability. If you actually have a premier contract, your technical account manager can actually be involved at that point, and they can kind of process some of this as it goes as well. And of course, there's always the account team to fall back on as well to kind of leverage those support processes. When it comes to Lync Online support, I think I was actually in a meeting with Derek Burney a couple of weeks ago. Derek Burney is our corporate vice president for Lync Skype. And I think he basically said, historically, Lync has actually given us 4 nines worth of uptime. That's actually Lync Online has. Really, we haven't had very many issues on the Lync side of things online. What happens if your on-prem infrastructure is down? You open a support ticket, they're going to tell you your on-prem infrastructure is down. So I think that's really where we would really have to kind of concentrate when it comes to support efforts.
We'll talk about where this fits in larger environments where you have entities that are ready for the PBX deployment and for their enterprise voice deployment. Go ahead and put those as tenants of Office 365 and Lync Online.
So, I mean, again, if you're, the issue that's going to be there, right, is if the user's online, you can't really assign a voice policy. If you can't assign a voice policy, there's no enterprise voice. So as you pull that user on-prem, you assign a voice policy, you basically fall right back to whatever voice support capability exists on-prem, right? Because now that's outside of the Office 365 cycle. For me, when I look at Lync split domain, we've obviously, interestingly enough, we're standing somewhere where we've had, disasters, both natural and unnatural, right? A company after one of those disasters actually had to spin up a number of resources very, very quickly. And as they go through and spin up those resources, they actually brought in an Office 365 instance. So this is prior to split domain being available, right? So now what you've basically done is you've spun up this workforce that has to go deal with issues outside, but they're a completely different organization. And some of those are corporate users where they're basically going through and signing into their Lync client. When they're signing out of that, signing in their tenant client so they can communicate with the rest of the team. This is a perfect scenario where Lync split domain today, just in the form of IAM presence and conferencing, actually meets a pretty massive need, right? Now, in the support scenarios, today there are some holes for sure when we start looking at split domain. You'll always have to look at where is that breakpoint, right? So monitoring is really the biggest key there. You have to monitor the solution. The solution has to tell you where things are going wrong. No worries. Sure.
If you're Lync online today, can you then move to on-prem?
Yes. So, again, interestingly enough, if you're Lync online today, as long as you've gone down the enterprise setup pathway, while you don't have Lync on premises today, your authentication mechanism still exists on-prem, right? It's a user ID. I mean, Lync is an attribute of an end user. That's enablement, that's all it is, right? I mean, we're basically stamping entries and saying this user belongs here. Getting those users back on-prem is pretty much the reverse process. Sure.
Is Lync supported, does Azure support Lync? So why can't I just move just a couple scenarios. One was, you're worried about, losing connectivity to the on-prem environment, right? So just like you do an exchange, you can technically put a domain control, a read-only domain control on
Sure.
Azure, and then that assures. So that would be my first question. Could we do something similar? My second question would be, what prevents me from, unless it's not supported, from putting all my Lync infrastructure in Azure? And what am I losing?
So support is actually the biggest part of it. Right now, that is not a supported scenario. We do not support Lync installs in Azure. It's something that's being discussed. I know the question comes up a lot. And most of the time, it's basically, I don't want to open ports for edge services. I don't care if they're outbound ports. I don't want to open those ports, right? Why can't we just put this in Azure? Well, I think Azure today has a limitation, and I could be completely wrong on this, so the Azure guys may come after me later, but I believe there's a limitation where you can only open 5 ports to a host. Additionally, think of an edge server, multiple NICs, multiple networks. I think that's another limitation that exists today in Azure. So there are challenges in getting that process tested out fully today. I'm sure we'll get there. Yeah.
What about the use for lab environments?
Again, I think you run into the same exact challenge. For a lab, depending on what you're trying to do, just like an internal lab, sure. But I think you'll run into challenges trying to install an edge server. Right?
Just a few questions. First one was, I had read somewhere that you have to provision a user on-prem first before moving them to Lync Online if you want both to be able to see.
Very good question, actually. Sorry. Very good question. Yes. So when we start looking at hybrid, when we get to split domain, all of your user activation happens on-prem. All of that management capability is moved back on-prem. So you're going to enable that user, and then you'll move the user, right? So the process basically becomes enable user, enable the license in Office 365. So enable user on-prem, enable license in Office 365, move user to Office 365.
I guess, and so the other questions were back towards the voice portion. So if we were, is there a grandfather in terms of being enabled for voice before the deprecation? And then kind of along with that as well with the dial-in meeting, I'm a little bit confused as to how that would work. Is it a third party only, or can you still provide that yourself?
So in Office 365, it's actually certified providers only. There are ways to get non-certified partner information in. I know we've had customers request that. It's basically, again, think of how ACP information goes in Office 365. It's at CS user ACP info, right? That's what's being run on the back end, and that's what provisions all of that info. However, if you're using a non-certified bridge, the one thing you're going to miss is the interaction between the bridge and the MCU. So what happens to a user that's basically, say, using their Lync phone or their mobile device, or they're using a Lync client to join that meeting while everybody else is sitting on a bridge out this way? There's no interaction between the two. Other things like audio recording, recordings don't work because there's no media. Lync doesn't see it. So, or you may get partial recordings, two people in here and everybody else in the bridge. So that's definitely a challenge. As far as being able to move a user, that was actually the process as part of hybrid voice. Was I would actually go through and enable a user, assign them a voice policy, move them, and then reassign a online voice policy, right? When you move the user, even though there's a voice policy that's defined with that user, they have no access to call PSTN until that cloud policy is assigned, which doesn't exist.
Okay, so that's, in other words, it's just gone. Like
For the time being, it's been deprecated.
So we're looking at a split domain,
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have an on-premise Lync. Are we supposed to maybe proactively be looking at keeping up with how Exchange Online upgrades their systems? So if we're on 2000, let's say we're in 2013 Lync on-premise, and Exchange Online is on 2013 as well, and a year from now or 2 years from now they move to 2015, whatever. Do we have to be proactive and keep up with Exchange Online? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's something that you have to look at, in the hybrid scenarios as well, right? So if you enabled Lync, so let's talk Lync specifically. Today you've got Lync 2010. We know the cloud, Office 365 multi-tenant's already up to 2013 for this particular tenant. We use split domain. As long as voice today is not an issue, I could theoretically move all of those users up, upgrade my infrastructure, and move those users back, right? So it can effectively become a swing migration pool, right? But you're absolutely right. There will come a time where you'll actually have to try to keep parity in the upgrades if that's a continuous solution, right? For me, Lync split domain is the first step, and it is just the beginning. As we start looking down the pipe and we start adding more and more functionality into Office 365, I think there'll come a point where, do I keep up with the on-prem upgrades, or you know what, we've got parity and I can actually transition. And that's kind of the thing that we're seeing in Exchange today as well. Any more questions? Again, as you guys think of those questions, come find us. I'll be at Ask the Experts tonight. I've got booth duty in about an hour as well, so I'll be around. Well, folks, thank you for attending.